The student disappeared on the way to the dormitory, and at first it seemed to the police that the solution was right before their eyes. But with each passing day of the investigation, they became more and more convinced that there were many confusing aspects in this case, and only an accident ultimately helped to find out the truth. Amy Blunt was born on October 1, 1969 in Homestead, Florida. She grew up in a loving family and had many friends, largely due to her cheerful and kind nature. When the girl was 14 years old, her father died. Despite this painful loss, Amy found the strength to maintain a positive outlook on life. After school, she entered Flagler College, which was located in the town of St. Augustine, near Jacksonville. Despite the fact that only 13,000 people lived in it, it was the oldest city in the United States. It was founded by Spanish sailors. So many elements of the architecture to this day are strikingly different from things familiar to Americans. Amy really enjoyed her time in college. Over the course of 3 years, she made many friends there. By that time she was 21 years old, and the girl had very little time left before receiving her diploma. On November 6, 1990, her friend Kim arrived in St. Augustine, and they decided to go to a local bar that was popular with students. Amy's dorm roommate and best friend named Curly also went with them. The girls had a great time, enjoying the long-awaited meeting. At some point, their mutual friend, Sean Nolan, joined them. He and Amy had a mutual attraction, but they were not in a relationship. By evening, Curly said she wasn't feeling well and went back to the dorm. A little later, Kim also left, leaving Sean and Amy alone. The next morning the girls were supposed to go to class, but when Curly woke up, she found Amy's bedroom door open and Amy not there. My friend thought this was strange, but she decided that she would see Amy in class. However, the girl never appeared there. Curly and Kim were dismayed by her absence and decided to talk to Sean, who had stayed with her at the bar the previous evening. The guy worked in an establishment not far from the college, and the girls went to him. His story initially seemed strange to them. At first, Sean said he had a bad hangover and was having trouble remembering the chronology of that evening. Having collected his thoughts, he nevertheless told them that after the bar, he and Amy went towards the beach for a walk, but were soon ready to go home. The guy called a taxi from a nearby payphone, and while they were waiting for the car, an argument occurred between him and Amy. As a result, the girl went on foot to the hostel, which was only a few minutes away. Curly was outraged that the guy left Amy alone and did not see her out. At the same time, she began to worry even more. The girl had nowhere to go except the dormitory, but she never appeared in her room. The friend feared that nothing bad could happen to her, and she seriously began to suspect Sean. His strange behavior only increased the anxiety. It seemed that the guy was absolutely not worried about the fact that Amy had disappeared. Curly decided to continue her search and went to the university campus. She asked everyone she knew if they had seen Amy. There was only one answer. No one met her that day, and no one knows where she might be. At approximately 6 p.m., the friend decided to contact the police. She informed investigators about the girl's disappearance, and they began checking the information. They called all the local hospitals, but they didn't see anyone like Amy. Calling taxi operators did not bring any results. None of the drivers gave the girl a lift that evening. The police could not find any evidence that Amy might have gotten into trouble or become a victim of a crime. In addition, the girl was already 21 years old at that time. For these reasons, they did not officially declare her missing, despite the requests of her friends. At that moment, Kelly was already 100% sure that something bad really happened to Amy. Realizing that she would not be able to convince the police to start a search, she decided to call her mother. Later, the girl admitted that it was the hardest call in her life. The next morning, he and his sister Amy drove to St. Augustine to take part in the search. The first thing they did was go to the police station, where they received the same answer. They could not begin an investigation because there was nothing to indicate a threat to life. Investigators believed that the girl simply left for a couple of days without warning. Then the sister, along with Kelly and other friends of the missing girl, decided to organize their own search operation. They printed out flyers with information about Amy and began posting them around the city. Soon a local TV channel came to their aid, spreading information about the girl's disappearance. All this led to many volunteers volunteering to take part in the search. They split into groups and began to comb both the city itself and the surrounding area. Volunteers examined forests, beaches, abandoned houses, but they were unable to find absolutely a single clue. This went on for 3 days until the police finally decided to start an investigation. By that time, the whole city was already talking about Amy's disappearance. This apparently put pressure on the local police department to take up the case. The first thing they decided to do was talk to Sean, since he was the last person to see Amy. And here, the first suspicious moment awaited them. The guy told them a story that was different from the story that Kelly and Kim heard. Sean stated that he and Amy left the bar and headed towards the beach, but along the way they decided to pass on the ladies. The guy went to the payphone and called a taxi, and when he turned around, Amy was nowhere to be found. After waiting for some time, he got into a taxi and went home. Investigators found this story strange, as the girl could disappear from the street in a few seconds, and Sean, who was standing a meter away from her, did not notice it. Besides, why did he tell his friends a different version of events? All this was enough to start considering Sean as a suspect. Detectives decided to check his story and find a taxi driver who was supposed to take him home that night, and soon they really succeeded. But his story was also different from Sean's 2 stories. The driver stated that he actually picked up the young man near a telephone booth. But when he arrived at the place, Sean was sleeping on a bench, and the taxi driver had to wake him up. There was no girl nearby at that moment. On the one hand, this gave the guy some kind of alibi. On the other hand, for some reason he distorted all his versions of what happened, which only alarmed the detectives. Despite this, there was no evidence against him, so the police continued to look for new leads. 10 days have passed since Amy disappeared. During all this time, there was no activity on her bank accounts, which only confirmed that the girl clearly did not leave somewhere on her own initiative. By then, St. Augustine residents and police began to suspect that Amy's disappearance might be connected to another series of heinous crimes. In August of the same year, in the city of Gainesville, which was 120 kilometers away, an unknown maniac killed 5 students. People began to fear that this criminal had moved into their city, and now they were all in mortal danger. Investigators contacted colleagues in Gainesville and began comparing the cases. But they soon realized that they had many inconsistencies in front of them. The Gainesville maniac attacked students in their homes and left their bodies there. In Amy's case, the police didn't even know whether the girl was still alive or what even happened to her. In addition, at the time of her disappearance, the police had already arrested a man who, with a high degree of probability, was the same killer. Several serious clues pointed to him, so detectives soon stopped looking for a connection between that series of crimes and Amy's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police department has offered a $1,000 reward for any information that helps find Amy. They immediately began to receive hundreds of requests, but most of them led to a dead end. This happens in any case where the authorities offer money for information. People come up with different stories in hopes of getting an easy check. There were also about 6 potential leads. Witnesses reported seeing her in different areas of the city. Many of them added that she got into some cars. Of all this mass, one call turned out to be much more interesting. The man stated that he saw Amy in the city center on the night of her disappearance. A rather old car, similar to a Chevrolet Camaro, drove up to her, with 2 men in it. After talking with them briefly, Amy got into the passenger seat, and they drove off. At that time, this was the most detailed lead detectives had on hand. However, something alarmed them in the behavior of the witness himself. After the call, he agreed to come to their station, answered all questions, and tried to help. but for some reason the investigators treated him with suspicion. Detectives called it police instinct and could not explain their doubts. They suggested that he undergo a polygraph test to verify his testimony, and the man agreed. He was asked only 2 questions. Does he have anything to do with Amy's disappearance? And can he lead the detectives to her? The witness answered negatively, and the polygraph operator did not record any signs of lying. Thus, investigators realized that they finally had honest testimony that could help find Amy. The police began searching for all vehicles matching the witness's description. They identified the drivers and checked their alibis on the night of the girl's disappearance. All this went on for several weeks, but the detective was unable to find a single potential suspect. Since then, no leads have emerged in this case. But on January 1, 2 months after Amy went missing, the police received an alarming call. A man was walking her dog on the outskirts of St. Augustine. At some point, his dog noticed a pile of logs with bricks and began to behave strangely. He barked and pulled on a leash, trying to run over there. The owner decided to see what worried his dog so much, and was almost speechless from what he saw. A skeleton's hand was sticking out from under the pile. He immediately called the police, and investigators began removing the body. Due to the high degree of decomposition, they were unable to quickly establish her identity. But one point immediately caught their attention. The body was wearing a green shirt, just like Amy Blunt was wearing the night she disappeared. The body was also wrapped in a sheet. Medical experts conducted more detailed tests and concluded that the deceased was a girl. She was hit 5 times with a sharp object, as evidenced by cuts on her shirt. In addition, 2 serious abrasions were found on the body. Investigators suspected that the deceased was Amy, so they immediately handed over her dental records to the expert. And soon they confirmed that it was really her. The girl's friends and relatives were devastated by the news. They hoped to the last that Amy would return to them safe and sound, but now the police had to investigate her murder. With the discovery of the body, they received their first clue. Amy was partially buried and covered by logs on the edge of a large private property. Having learned the name of the owner of this plot, they called him in for questioning. For obvious reasons, the man immediately became a suspect, but after talking with him, investigators doubted his involvement. Firstly, it was a huge territory without a fence and anyone could enter it. Secondly, there were 2 caravans on this property, the owners of which paid rent to the owner of the land. He added that he constantly has problems with one of the tenants. The police were shocked when they heard his name. It turned out to be the same witness who was interrogated using a polygraph. This man was 22-year-old Timothy Gatchell. The police immediately asked the owner of the trailer to let them search the home while the man himself was not at home, and he agreed. The first thing the police saw was a sheet very similar to the one in which the body was wrapped. During a more detailed search, they found a long woman's hair stuck in the mechanism of the floor exercise machine. It was the same color as Amy's. In addition, forensic scientists using special chemicals found traces of blood in the living room. A piece of paper with Toby's name and phone number was also found in the house. The owner of the land said that a guy with that name actually often came to see Timothy. The police admitted that this man might also have something to do with the murder and contacted him. Toby agreed to meet with detectives and told them his story. According to him, the evening Amy disappeared, he and Timothy drove around the city, stopping at different bars. How at some point they saw Amy walking down the street alone. Then Timothy asked to slow down, got out of the car, and walked towards the girl. He called her with them, and Amy got into their car. Together they arrived at Timothy's trailer, where they had a party. However, his story began to seem strange to the detectives. At first he said that he just dropped Amy and Timothy off at the trailer, and immediately left. He then changed his story and stated that he went inside with them, drank beer, and then went to the toilet. After that, he allegedly immediately left and got into the car without going into the living room. Investigators doubted that he was 100% honest with them. They did not believe that Amy could have gone to the outskirts of the city at night with two unknown men. She had to go to class in the morning and was going to go to the dorm right after the bar. It was as if Toby had structured his story in such a way that he could not be made an accomplice. Detectives did not rule out that he and Timothy could actually kidnap the girl on an empty night street, but they could not prove it yet. Besides, Toby said something else. According to him, during the first week of the investigation, he saw flyers about the disappearance of Amy and recognized her. Then the man asked Timothy what happened that night. He stated that he took the girl to the city center and dropped her off there. After that, she went to another car and soon got into it. Toby told him that he should share this information with the police. Despite the fact that his story raised serious doubts, the police had enough evidence to arrest Timothy. They drove up to his house, and the man himself came out with his hands raised. During interrogation, he told investigators that when Toby left, he began to pest Amy, but she refused him. Then he got angry and decided to take her back to the city. Considering that he did not have his own car, he took the owner of the land's pickup truck and drove her to the center, where Amy allegedly got into another car. But detectives immediately realized that this was a lie. At that point, they already knew that 3 tires on the rental truck had been flat and worn out for many months. The investigators immediately told him about this, and Timothy became nervous. The detective asked him, "Did you kill Amy?" And the man replied, "I don't know. It looks like it." From that moment, he began to talk about the events of that night. According to him, he did not remember what was happening well. At one point, he tried to kiss Amy, and the next thing he remembers, she had a knife in her hands. He was allegedly afraid that the girl might attack him, so he tried to snatch the weapon from her. After this, Timothy did not remember anything, as if he had lost consciousness. According to him, this has happened to him before. He was completely missing some of his memories. Having come to his senses, he discovered that the knife was now in his hand, and Amy was lying on the floor and showed no signs of life. Frightened, he decided to get rid of the body. Timothy went to the barn to get a shovel and started digging a hole. Next, he wrapped Amy in a sheet and buried her there, covering the grave with logs and bricks. After that, he prayed to God and went to wash the blood in the room. Having his confession in hand, Timothy was charged with murder. Not a single piece of evidence could be found against Toby, so he was used only as a witness. On July 15, 1991, a trial took place, at which the man planned to defend himself and receive a less serious punishment. He wanted to frame it as self-defense and also use the memory loss story. However, everything changed when the prosecutor approached the court and asked for the death penalty. Almost immediately after this, Timothy stood up and said that he was ready to confess to first-degree murder if the prosecution refused execution in favor of a life sentence. After some deliberation, the court agreed to these conditions, and Timothy received a life sentence. Amy's relatives and friends supported this decision. They all hated the man who took her from them and wanted him to spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. As for Toby, no charges were ever brought against him, although his story still seems dubious. Timothy is still in prison to this day.